Everyone. All right. Happy April. um, I hope everyone has been enjoying the beautiful sunlight that we've been having and a little bit of rain. We need the rain for all of the flowers that everybody is planting and all of the plants. I know that we've started our vegetable garden and we've got things in the ground and they're just racing. They're going so fast. So spring came early this year. I think it came a couple of 2 or 3 weeks early because how your phone sometimes sends you old pictures. I got one from last year, and about this time last year, my azaleas were in full bloom. And now they're all gone, because they've already done that this year. So just a little bit of global weirding going on there, and a prime example of it. I'm going to start off by sharing my screen, and I'm going to tell you about a whole bunch of ways that you can start celebrating the spring. And Earth Day is always April 21st. And our 22nd. I guess I get confused because I work at MUSC and we celebrate it different days every year. So this year we're celebrating it on the 20th. All right. So if you find the Low Country Land Trust's website, it's lowcountrylandtrust.org/special events. You are going to be able to find all the Earth Day events happening locally. They've got this one page and you can just scroll down. Some of these events have already happened. They started happening April 2nd and they go all the way through the month. Like the Charleston Bee Expo is coming up. We've got all kinds of volunteer events. You could volunteer at the High Water Festival if you wanted to. The Green Heart Project is doing that. You could volunteer to bag shells for DNR. There's sunset yoga on the beach. These are some really great programs about all different types of things. We've got bird walks at Kiowa. Litter collection, compost. If you want to learn how to compost, the city of Charleston has several compost workshops that will be going on throughout the month. And you could go over to Angel Oak Preserve and clean up. Shem Creek, shorebirds. Here's the Greenest Day is going to be a huge Earth Day and Arbor Day celebration at MUSC. That's the one that I'm working on hosting. So far, we've got over 30 tables signed up with all different types of eco organizations. And we're going to have food trucks out there and live music. You can volunteer at the urban farm. So get online and find out what you want to do. There's plenty to do this month. And at the end of the month, to sort of wrap it up and get together, there's going to be a big Earth Week celebration at Holy City Brewing. So all the organizations that have been working all month to put on all these events are going to be there. And we look forward to celebrating with you and, holding up a pint for the earth. All right. Oh, and don't forget, next month, May, it's Mobility Month. So Charleston Moves has a ton of really, really cool events planned for Mobility Month. So get out there both months. Charleston is so full of things to do. We're never without something to do, right? Let me go and find the next thing that I need to share. All right. It takes a minute to toggle between screens here. All right, this should be up now. Great. All right. So we are the Robert Lunz Group Sierra Club, and we've got over 1,200 members. Our membership has been going up, actually. So thank you to all of our members. Let me get rid of that. Our mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect the planet. And we do that through volunteerism. We have our leadership. I'm Christine von Kallnitz. I'm the chair of the local group. Pat Luck is our vice chair. We have a treasurer position open if anyone's interested in that. Ben Mack has been, he's actually now the chair of the chapter. So he's the chair of the whole state chapter of Sierra Club. And then Star Hazard has been doing a super fabulous job as our outings chair. And he's working throughout the state trying to have outings this year run from the ocean to the mountains. So he's on it. He's got a lot of new outings leaders signed up and trained. So our outings program is growing, which is awesome, because I know we all love the outings. And then Laura was the one that was talking earlier. She is our publicity chair, and she is running the Zoom tonight. Thank you, Laura. Alec Cooley is our newsletter editor, and Nina Fair has been working on setting up programs. All right. Our oyster roast was absolutely fabulous. Thank you to everyone who came. Thank you to everyone who volunteered. These are a few of the photos from that day. It was just the music, the ice cream, the oysters, the sun, the fun. It was just absolutely great. And we had a good bit of volunteers. So we want to thank you all. Alec, Alma, Ben, Brian, David Michael, Evelyn Putnam, Georgia Roan, Ingrid, Jean, Jock, Jonathan, Kathy, Kim Perry, Laura Moses, Lime the Coconuts, Martha, Nina, Pat, Sean, Star, Terry Lynn, and Terry Hartnett. If we did miss your name, we are very sorry about that. Please let us know. We cannot put on this event without these volunteers. So if you want to get involved, please let us know. There's Brian. He's in the waiting room. I'm going to admit him. So Brian, we just thanked you for your volunteerism and welcome to the meeting. All right. So the outings program. Normally Star goes over our outings, but he's not here tonight. He's on an outing. So we hope that he is having a great time. But there's a canoe or kayak trip this weekend on Mosquito Creek, and that's one of Bill Turner's trips. I've been on this creek one other time, and it's beautiful trip. It's down in the Ace Basin on the Ashpoo River. It might rain Saturday, so if you have signed up for this trip, look for your email from Bill Turner to tell you whether that trip is actually going to go and if there's a rain date for that. On Thursday, February 13th, Bill is taking another trip, and that's going to be to Remini Swamp. And I can tell you that Remini Swamp is one of the best places in the Low Country to go. So if you have a canoe or a kayak, get out there, get on this trip. Bill knows this swamp. You can go in, it's incredible. He can go in and just paddle through the trees, and you think he doesn't know where he's going, but he absolutely knows where he's going, and it's awesome. It's a great trip. But one of the birds you hear is the prothonotary warbler, and it's got a beautiful, beautiful song. So look forward to seeing you out there. That's a Thursday trip now, so beware of that. This picture actually is of our wilderness first aid class that happened in March. And as you can see here, some of our new leaders, and they're being trained on how to take care of any kind of mishaps that might happen in the wilderness. So, you know, if you're out there with one of our leaders, you can be confident that they know what they're doing. All right, next month, there's this thing called PFAS. And what that is it's a chemical and it is very persistent in the environment. So when it gets put out there, it doesn't go away. And it can cause all kinds of problems. And what we need to do is we need to learn about this chemical. We need to learn how did it get into our environment? It is in literally everyone's body. So over the whole entire planet. And if you've been looking at the papers recently, actually South Carolina DHEC is they're right now going over a proposed regulation from the federal government. And then that regulation is going to spread throughout the country and it's going to affect water. So all of the water companies are going to have to work on trying to get this PFAS out of our water systems because it's in our water. So we're going to learn why it's harmful, how can we avoid that? And then what are these regulations going to do for us? So hopefully you can make it next month. We'll hear about that. All right, June 1st, we are teaming up with Piccolo Spoleto. We will have a movie. It's called Barbarian Utopia, Encounters on the Appalachian Trail. That's going to be an in-person only meeting because it's a movie and it's just hard to simulcast that online while we're watching it live. So hopefully you can make it downtown at the College of Charleston. We'll be at the Robert Scott Small Library, or the old library, sorry. It's a classroom building now. Sorry, I went to school there and I remember it being the library. So we'll be in room 235. It's an auditorium and we look forward to seeing you then. All right, tonight we have Emily Zucchino. She is the Director of Community Engagement for the Dogwood Alliance. She is here to talk to us about wood pellet biomass and the climate emergency associated with that. Emily blends her love of beautiful southern U.S. forest with an enthusiasm for taking on the corporate interests that threaten our communities and our environment in the name of profit. She's a graduate of UNC Asheville with a BA degrees in political science and sociology. She holds a master's in international studies. Sorry, my bird's getting my ear. She holds a master's in international studies and a certificate in nonprofit management from North Carolina State. Emily's an avid hiker and traveler and has explored trails from the Appalachians to the Himalayas to the Amazon. That's awesome. Well, Emily, we're glad you're here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for letting us know all about these wood pellets. I know it's a big issue in the Carolinas. For everyone else, Emily's going to start sharing her screen. If you can turn off your cameras, you will help save energy. So we'll all turn our cameras off. We'll keep our microphones on mute. And if you have a question, please pop it in the chat. What else? I think that's it. All right, Emily.
Cool. Well, thanks, Christine, and thanks everyone for inviting me to be your speaker tonight. It's nice to meet you all. I'll turn my camera off once I start presenting, but just thought I'd introduce myself real quick. It's always funny to see my picture and my bio, which are about almost 10 years old at this point, and I'm thinking I should update those. But my name is Emily. I am the Director of Community Engagement at Dogwood Alliance, and I've been with Dogwood almost 10 years now. Those of you that aren't familiar with Dogwood Alliance, we work for environmental justice and forest protection by working with and mobilizing diverse voices and communities across the southern U.S. Okay, I can turn my camera, or I can leave my camera on, either way. I'll be sharing screen in a minute anyway. So Dogwood, I'm based in Asheville, North Carolina, and many of my fellow Dogwooders are as well, but we are regional, so we do have staff not all across the region, but we're all remote now. and we work across the entire US South. My work is focused primarily in North Carolina, but I'm very familiar with the biomass industry as a whole, and I've tried to do my research on South Carolina just to kind of be up to date on what the wood pellet industry is doing and planning to do in South Carolina. So I will share my screen and go through a presentation. If you have clarifying questions, please jump in, ask, and if not, I'm going to try and not talk for too long so that we have time for questions and discussion. I will go ahead and share my screen. Not judge all of my tabs. How do I do this? There we go. So I like to start just with a quick appreciation for the southern forests that we are working to protect. So I find them to be some of the most beautiful in the world. I have traveled quite a bit, and I'm always just so thrilled to come back home to the South, to the lush, beautiful forest here in Asheville, the beautiful forest in the Low Country. It's just an amazing place. They're a place for us to hike, camp, hunt, fish, relax, and they're also essential for maintaining our ecosystems. They're also some of the most biodiverse, not only in the US, but the world. I think people think a lot of, the Amazon, other forests as being diverse and amazing, and they are, but I don't know that many people realize just how incredibly biodiverse our southern forests are. We have some of the highest concentration of tree species diversity in North America, the highest concentration of aquatic diversity in the continental US, and the highest concentration of wetlands in the US. The Southern Coastal Plain has also recently been declared a global biodiversity hotspot, meaning these forests contain a high amount of native species and the habitat of these species is threatened. So the wood pellet industry in the South. Over the past decade, this industry has grown from almost nothing to 23 mills across the South, producing more than 10 million tons of wood pellets. Enviva is the largest producer of wood pellets in the world, and they produce about 6.2 million tons per year of these pellets. So what they do is they log forests, they turn them into these little wood pellets that kind of look like the size, I've heard people compare it to like the size of a cigarette, but and then they ship them overseas where they're burned in power stations in Europe and increasingly in Asia. And oftentimes they are burned alongside coal and being called green energy. So few regulations on logging have turned the US South into the primary sourcing region for these wood pellets. We are clear cutting our forests, polluting communities, and investing millions in an industry, all to provide electricity and power overseas. This is a map produced by the Southern Environmental Law Center, and this just gives you a scope of the problem across the South. So the yellow dots are operating facilities, the red are proposed, and this should be the most up-to-date map that they've put out. And the brown circles are the sourcing radius. So you can see here in South Carolina, there's one plant up here that's logging in a lot of the kind of northeastern part of the state. This Enviva Hamlet plant dips down into South Carolina. Up where I work in North Carolina, you can just see that the region is getting slammed by these industries. In South Carolina, Enviva currently operates one facility. So that's the one I just showed you right here, Enviva Greenwood. They have had this proposed Lawrence facility for a while. That's in Lawrence County. I don't know if they're still planning to move forward with that one or not. I don't think it's on their most recent map. Enviva's facility produces 600,000 tons per year of wood pellets, and this amount requires about 14,400 acres of forest per year to create that amount of wood pellets. There's another facility called Effingham Pellets, and it's located in Florence, South Carolina. It's much smaller at 45,000 tons per year. I did just see an update, well, this was about a month ago now, that they are applying for a permit to expand production to 173,000 tons per year. I don't know if DHEC will hold a public hearing, but that's something y'all might want to keep an eye on, is that plant might continue to try to expand production. Enviva is also considering additional plants in South Carolina. This is from their most recent investor presentation, which just happened earlier this week. And so I think this, and so the white dots here are sites under control or assessment. So areas where Enviva is looking to have new wood pellet facilities. They currently have plans right now to double their production over the next 5 years. And so they are looking to do that in the Gulf South, in Georgia, and also in South Carolina. So I think this top one here, that might be the Lawrence County site that they've been looking at for quite some time, about 5 years now, and have not moved forward on that. And then this one will be maybe concerning to y'all down in Charleston, that they are exploring a site. It's hard to tell, y'all know the area better, so you might know, but they don't often release the names of the counties or the cities until it's a done deal. So we're often just looking at the map and trying to do our best guess. So I don't know exactly where that is, but this is the information that they have put out. Burning wood pellets produces 50% more carbon emissions than burning coal. So at the smokestack, when these pellets are burned, they're actually worse for the climate than coal. The industry says, well, we're replanting the trees, we're reabsorbing all that carbon. But what the science is showing is that even if these trees are replanted, because of the type of trees that the wood pellet industry is taking, that Enviva is taking, it will take 40 to 100 years for the carbon to be reabsorbed. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the IPCC reports that are saying we just don't have that time. We don't have 40 years for that carbon to be reabsorbed into the atmosphere. We need to be reducing carbon emissions now. So this industry is putting more carbon into the atmosphere than coal at a time when we desperately need to be drastically reducing our carbon emissions. The weird reason for this is that the existing policy has created what's been called a carbon accounting loophole. And so the carbon emissions, even though, if you remember I said at the point of combustion, they're putting out 50% more carbon than coal, those emissions are not being counted at the smokestack. Now, the reason for this is this policy that says, well, those emissions are going to be counted when those forests are logged. But the US does not count carbon emissions from logging. So we have an industry here, if you see this headline from the New Yorker, the millions of tons of carbon emissions that don't officially exist. But they do exist, but they are not being accounted for by policymakers who are massively subsidizing this industry in the European Union. With these subsidies, without these subsidies and with these subsidies, this industry is very expensive to operate. So we are subsidizing an industry that is more expensive than wind and solar, in some ways at the expense of wind and solar. When you look at the European Union putting massive amounts of subsidies into burning wood, when those subsidies could be going to other forms of actually clean energy. And it's not even doing what we need it to be doing. Across the South, Enviva is clear-cutting nearly 150,000 acres of forest a year. And so that adds up to more than 400 acres a day. In North Carolina, where Enviva exports more wood pellets than any other state in the nation, they have been caught logging native hardwood forests and wetlands in eastern North Carolina. There have been studies showing that the areas around Enviva's North Carolina mills have experienced a net loss of hardwood forests. So the industry, Enviva and other forest product industries, often talk about the health of forests in the South, how forests are growing. But what's actually happening is that native forests, hardwood forests, are decreasing and being replaced with monocrop pine plantations that don't have nearly the same biodiversity benefits or carbon sequestration benefits as a native forest. Enviva claims to use what they call waste wood. There was a recent CBS morning news piece, well, it was last year at this point, where Enviva went on the air, and they've been saying this for years, saying it's important not to call what we use trees. They are tops and limbs. So they're saying they come in and take the waste left over from other logging sites. But there have been multiple investigations, and now there's been a whistleblower at Enviva who have come out and confirmed that this is not true. Enviva clear cuts forest and use whole trees in their pellets. This is important because when this industry began, it was really based on this idea that they'd be using waste wood, but that is very much not the case. And it's especially not the case as the industry plans to double production in the next 5 years and will need more and more trees to fulfill their production. Now, obviously, if left standing, these forests would provide a lot of benefits to the ecosystem and communities. They would support floodwater absorption, water filtration, biodiversity, carbon sequestration, all sorts of things. So as I'm sure y'all are familiar with, where you live, the communities in the southern coastal plain are experiencing increased and more severe flooding. Especially now, inland flooding is putting many people at risk, and these are often the areas in North Carolina where Enviva is logging. So in Robeson County, which is just over the border from y'all in South Carolina, we work with communities who have still not recovered from Hurricane Matthew. So these storms are hitting people hard, and not having our forests there to help absorb the floodwater is making issues worse. There are best management practices. So anyone who might be a landowner, is familiar with logging, might say like, hey, what about the BMPs? These best management practices that are supposed to reduce logging in sensitive areas, like by rivers, by wetlands. But these are completely voluntary, and they're not sufficient to protect forests and to maintain those ecosystem services. Specifically, wetland forests provide flood protection by acting like sponges, soaking up excess water and reducing peak flows during flooding. And these are areas that we have seen Enviva target in North Carolina. This industry is also an environmental injustice. Wood pellet production facilities are 50% more likely to be placed in an environmentally unjust community. I don't have this number exactly, but I would say if you look, because this includes all wood pellet production facilities, my experience with Enviva is that their percentage is going to be higher than this. In North Carolina, every single facility is in an environmentally unjust community. And I looked at the statistics for their Greenwood, South Carolina, which is nearly 50% African-American, almost double the state average. I did not look at the poverty stats, but generally when we say environmentally unjust, we're talking higher than state averages of communities of color living in the area and higher than state averages of people living under the poverty line. Industrial logging has not created wealth in rural communities. Counties with industrial logging remain some of the poorest in the South. And a lot of my work in North Carolina is with the communities who are living near these wood pellet facilities. And it's important to remember that we are not saying no jobs, no development, but as Belinda Joyner said in a recent press conference, rural counties need jobs and development, but we want development that doesn't make us choose between our health and our livelihood. Wood pellet facilities release tons of soot and other harmful air pollutants that can trigger asthma and heart attacks and have been linked to cancer. These facilities operate 24 hours a day, causing loud noise pollution that affects the sleep of the surrounding community. There was a gentleman quoted in, was it the CNN article? A man from Northampton County who said he doesn't dream anymore since Enviva moved in. And that hit me really hard, thinking, this industry has literally robbed this man of his dreams. And being a fairly new mother, I remember what it was like to be up all hours of the night. And so, these are the type of impacts that people are living with that really, really affect their quality of life. In North Carolina, all of the counties with Enviva mills have some of the worst health outcomes in the state. So these are the type of counties where this industry is locating, where people are already living with other facilities that are polluting them and impacting their health. And then you have this additional polluter on top of all of these other industries. I'm not sure if y'all ever talk about cumulative impacts. It's an issue that's become kind of a common thread across a lot of the environmental organizations in North Carolina, is fighting for our permitting agency to consider cumulative impacts in the permitting process. because currently as the system works, when the permitting agency allows a facility, they're just looking at the pollution from that one facility, and they're not taking into account all of the other industries in the area that are polluting and creating this cumulative impact. And so that's a big problem in all of the wood pellet communities in North Carolina, and I imagine it's similar in South Carolina. This industry has a long history of violations, yet they are continuously granted permits and grants using taxpayer dollars despite these violations. A 2018 report on the wood pellet industry revealed widespread violations of the Clean Air Act. So across the board, across the South, wood pellet industries polluting in excess of what they were permitted to do so, and actually in violation of the Clean Air Act. In North Carolina, this actually led to a lawsuit brought by local residents at one of the facilities that resulted in pollution reductions by 95%. Those same reductions were applied at the Greenwood facility in South Carolina. However, even with that reduction, the pollution and the toxins coming from these facilities are still harmful to human health. In South Carolina, in July of 2020, Enviva signed a consent order with DHEC paying a $13,000 fine, which by the way is a total, pocket change for them, and admitted that it hadn't kept proper records on its equipment. It also agreed that smoke coming from its smokestacks was too thick and needed a plan to control dust. So this is very typical of the industry, especially the two largest players, Enviva and Drax. Enviva is the one that operates in the Carolinas. They are often having these violations and then having to pay, minor fines from it, and nobody in the community is ever notified or no form of redress is ever given. And despite that, DHEC still granted Enviva permission to expand production by 25%. That was back in 2020 as well. There's strong opposition to the wood pellet industry in the US and in Europe, and also increasingly now in Asia as the industry seeks to expand there. The US South has been the subject of many major media pieces, including CNN, CBS Morning Show, New York Times, National Geographic, and several more. Public hearings for the industry in North Carolina and South Carolina are dominated by opposition. I remember the virtual public hearing in 2020 for that Greenwood plant had a lot of community residents show up and talk about the impacts from the dust, from the noise, from the logging. Yet, as I mentioned before, that permit was still granted. North Carolina's own clean energy plan, released by our governor for energy produced within the state, states concerns with the biomass industry and excludes it from being used in North Carolina, yet still allows for the industry to cut down our trees, export them overseas to be burned for energy. Last year, actually this might be 2 years ago, I think I need to update this slide, 500 scientists sent a letter to President Biden claiming that governments must end subsidies and wood and other incentives that today exist for the burning of wood. And the National NAACP has actually released a resolution opposing the wood pellet industry. The biomass industry is heavily dependent on international subsidies. Drax, who is the largest biomass power plant, and they're located in the UK, they purchase the wood pellets that Enviva produces from our southern forests. They receive almost 1 million per day in subsidies from the EU. These subsidies divert funds from cleaner and smarter investments like wind and solar. These subsidies are set to expire in March of 2027. There was recently debates in the EU about actually capping or reducing these subsidies, but as of now, those subsidies will continue through 2027 and potentially beyond. However, there have been some victories. Recently, the Netherlands, who's a major importer of Enviva's wood pellets, passed a policy restricting subsidies for biomass and actually called out Enviva for their unsustainable practices. In May of last year, a committee of the EU Parliament voted in favor of reducing subsidies to the industry. Unfortunately, that did not go through with the EU Commission. And in December of 2022, Australia became the first country to ban biomass as sustainable energy. kind of essentially dashing the hopes of the industry of expanding in Australia. There are better ways to support rural development. As I mentioned, a lot of the communities that I work with in North Carolina are in these wood pellet areas with wood pellet facilities. And they've been very clear that development is not the problem. It is the type of development that degrades the environment and degrades human health. So they have come up with a list of better ways to support rural development, such as outdoor recreation, clean energy like wind and solar, local food production and sales, sustainable agriculture and other niche crops, non-polluting manufacturing, expansion of healthcare services, and just some statistics on outdoor recreation in South Carolina. This generates nearly 2 times more value than forest products and has created more than 125,000 more jobs than the forest products industry, and contributes nearly $1 billion more in annual tax revenue. So this is big business in the South and in South Carolina. And I think it's just important to remember that, because we hear a lot of opposition about, well, what about the jobs? You know, these areas need jobs, and I couldn't agree more. But what I would like to see is jobs that actually enhance the environment and enhance people's lives. So if you want to get involved, there are a number of ways. I can drop a petition in a moment here in the chat box that you can call on. Well, there's 2. I put the federal government here, but I think there's one that you can actually send to your representative to take action on biomass. In North Carolina, we have postcards that we send to our governor. We can get you set up with some of those for South Carolina. Host a screening of Burned. It's a really fantastic full-length feature film about the industry. It actually comes in a 30-minute, I think 70 and 90-minute version, and it's a really excellent deep dive into the industry. Contact your legislators, reach out if you want to volunteer. Thank you for your time. That's it from me. I know that I did not cover everything, but I wanted to kind of move through the basics and then make time for any questions or discussion that y'all want to have. Oh, Christine, you're on mute.
I have one question. Do you know what kind of subsidies these companies are getting from South Carolina by any chance?
I could not. I did look around a little and I could not find anything in South Carolina. I think I did see something for Greenwood, but I couldn't find details. But if it's anything like North Carolina, in North Carolina, the Commerce Department has given some subsidies, and then the counties give a lot of subsidies in the form of tax breaks, in the form of land,
Right.
and actually just like local grants. And so I'm imagining that's probably the case in Greenwood, and anywhere else that they would locate in South Carolina. I highly doubt they would locate anywhere without receiving like a pretty healthy package of subsidies and incentives.
And from the pictures you showed and what you were talking about, a lot of this land seems to be right next to rivers.
They are operating all along the coastal plain. Here, I can pop that image back up of the industry just for a second here, and then I'll unshare. But they are, if you see kind of this shaded green region, that is the American coastal plain. So a lot of rivers, a lot of wetlands, and a lot of feedstock for Enviva, if you want to call it that. They also want to be near ports so that they can easily get their product over to Europe and to Asia. So yes, they are concentrated here. This is also, I mentioned in the first slide, this global biodiversity hotspot. That is this region, and that is exactly where Enviva is operating.
Okay. And you talked about the things that we could do at the very end there, and you were mentioning signing a petition, I believe, or
yes.
Can you put a link to that in the chat?
Yes, thanks for that reminder.
And if there are any links to sort of a website that would have more information.
Yes, let me link the
Okay, I see that now.
Dogwood. Yeah, and that petition I linked is on the Dogwood Alliance website. So,
Great.
but I'll link the main website too. But this is where we keep all of our reports. Actually, and I meant to have this other handout pulled up that is specifically about South Carolina, and I can drop that in the chat as well.
Okay, great. And as far as the damage to our forest, I mean, those maps kind of made it pretty evident that they're taking a lot of forest. And when they plant it back, are they planting like pine? Do you know, or what are they doing when they plant it back?
Yeah, I can answer that, and feel free, like anyone else on this call who has expertise in the area. I don't claim to be the total expert, so I welcome anyone else to jump in. But I can't answer this question. Enviva contracts with logging industries, and so that's why they'll often say, well, we don't log. They are logging. They're contracting with logging industries who go out and find landowners and clear cut these forests.
Okay.
When that land is replanted, generally it's going to be recommended by the forester that they replant with pine plantations, because those are going to be the easiest to replant in those rows. They're going to grow the quickest. So, a pine plantation you can harvest, and please, anyone, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, like every 15 to 20 years, you can harvest those pine plantations. And so that's generally what people are going to be recommended that they replant.
Okay. And one thing you just said that was key, I think, is that a lot of the land that they're logging on is not theirs, it's privately owned.
So nearly 90% of the forested land in the southern US is privately owned. And so that's why I mentioned at the beginning, there's very, very few regulations on what can happen on this land. So Enviva is not going, they're not logging at this point from public lands that I'm aware of. It's all on private land. So there are those best management practices that landowners, I'm sure many do follow, but those are all voluntary, and they still allow for great harm to our forests. And generally what the forestry industry is going to encourage is clear cut practices versus, more selective cutting. They're just going to go in and clear cut. Do I have any pictures of clear cuts in there? I'm sure y'all are familiar where you're located and have seen clear cuts, but they're devastating.
Right. Yeah. Highway 17 South through the Ace Basin, you see clear cuts on that road often. And yeah, I do think it is a travesty, especially for our flooding issues that are just getting worse. I definitely feel for these communities in these rural areas where, not only they're losing their trees, but like you said, it's harming their health. That's incredible. So would these trees, I don't know, and I'm sure there's a lot of forests that are being cut for other forest products. So, I don't even know if we have an idea of, the scale of forestry even in our own state.
Yeah, there's a lot of other big bad players on the scene. And so Enviva, I understand the wood pellet industry is about 3% of that total, which might not sound like much, but then you think, well, that's an additional percentage on forests that weren't otherwise targeted. So the type of forest that Enviva is logging, these, bottomland hardwoods that were formerly not being targeted for production, are now being logged. And yes, that's in addition to other big logging industries like the paper company, like other timber industries.
Okay. And the other threat is that if these people are not logging these lands, they're going to sell them for development.
Right. So and actually, before I just want to give one stat. So earlier in my presentation, I said that Enviva is logging 150,000 acres per year across the South. and the stat here on this South Carolina page is that 150,000 acres of South Carolina forests are clear cut every year. That's for not just wood pellets, but the wood products industry. So just to give you a sense of what that industry is actually like in your state, it's pretty massive. And yeah, to that question about development, we hear that all the time from industry. Well, the best way, I remember the North Carolina Forestry Association, one of their employees coming to a public hearing for Enviva and saying, the best way to protect forests is to cut them down. That's this industry mindset that if we don't have a market for our forests, then they're all going to be developed. And there's plenty of holes in that argument. The first I'll start with is if you look at these rural areas, there's not a lot of development. One of our contacts in Northampton County, she always tells me, she's like, I wish, which is where an Enviva plant is. It's like, I wish we had more development here. I have to go to the next county over to, go out to eat, to go shopping. And so there's not this major threat for development in these rural areas where Enviva is operating that there are in more urban areas. So that argument just doesn't hold up. The other thing is we really need to look at what policies are driving this kind of incentive where we are putting so much taxpayer money towards incentivizing the forestry industry. And so what we want to explore is, well, what would it look like to incentivize keeping forests standing for carbon sequestration, for ecosystem services, for flood benefits? There are other benefits that forests can provide, even just being, public land and green space. So that is the argument made by forestry, but I think it's a weak argument, and it really kind of misses the mark on what we need our forests to be doing for us and for our climate.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of the same problem we have as passive users of land. We're not given standing because we're not hunting or we're not fishing. All we want to do is walk in the woods.
Right.
So it's the same argument. Yeah.
And the people who are being most impacted by this industry are generally not the people who are benefiting from it. And a lot of the conversation is centered around the rights of the landowner. And I think that's just the history of the country we live in and private ownership. And it is the world we live in, but we've got to get creative and think about new ways to treat these forests.
Absolutely. So there are no questions coming through in the chat. If anyone has a question, do you want to just call out your question? You want to take yourself off mute and let us know if you have a question?
I have a question.
Okay.
Thank you, Christine.
Yeah.
Emily, this has been absolutely illuminating and scary at the same time. And I have so many questions, but I'm going to start with one, and that is there an organization that currently exists that would actually pay these owners not to allow their forests to be cut down for this industry? And that may sound kind of pie in the sky, but I live here on Edisto Island, and we have the Edisto Island Trust, and it actually buys property that will not be developed so that our biodiversity can remain pristine. And it's not to say that there's still nasty cutting being done. I saw a big load of timber as I was driving back over the bridge today, but I'm just wondering, is there an entity that could pay these landowners instead of the landowners being, I would think probably coerced by the biomass companies to allow their land to be cut down, because I do see that, when these lands are replanted, it is all pine trees. Well, if you just look where I live in rural South Carolina, rural Edisto Island, it's not just pine trees. It's a million kinds of different pine tree or trees that attract all kinds of different bugs and birds and animals and all of that. So I guess it's kind of a long question, but what are your thoughts
Yeah, and
on
please
some
again,
kind of entity? Go ahead.
sorry, finish up. Didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I would love to hear your thoughts. Is there an entity or a group or, something like an Edisto Island Trust that could just basically go to owners and say, hey, instead of, giving your forest to Enviva to cut down, we will pay you to let it be.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that's
so
what I was thinking.
I'll speak briefly on that, and then again, always open it up to like others who might have more experience in this area. Kind of like policy wise, and it differs by state, but my understanding is that there are programs that do offer some benefits for things like carbon storage, or for landowners like keep their forest standing. But from what I understand is that they're small programs and there's not a lot of funding in them, but it would be worth looking into, if that's information y'all wanted to share, or I could ask my my coworker who might have a better idea of what state policies are. It might be worth looking into those because they do exist. And there are also things like conservation easements and land trusts. My understanding with these is that it can sometimes be a little bit of a bottleneck to get into them because there's maybe not enough funding for the amount of people who want to get into them. And then the other thing that I hear a lot from communities across the South and kind of this vision of something that we would like to see is community-owned forests, or ways that people can interact more with the land, because I think there is some, if you're putting the land in a trust, some of them can be quite restrictive. So my coworker actually works with a community in Britain's Neck, and they have been working to conserve some land, and they've been trying to figure out with the land trust where they are getting funding to preserve the land, but they also want to build a community education center where people can come and just be in community and learn about the land. They want to build like a kayak ramp. And so it's finding that balance between like what's allowed within the confines of the land trust and the conservation easements versus like how can the community also interact with the land. So yes, there are some opportunities, but I think not enough. And please, anyone who has like more experience with conservation work or policy, jump in and fill in anything I might have missed.
I think that was a great answer. There is a South Carolina program, that it's through the state, and they put money into this bucket every year to buy land. And we just have to, continue to talk to our legislators and, tell them that we want them to do that. So that does help.
Well, I love that idea because I think some people like myself see what's happening, but we really don't know what to do, right? So, it kills me to see on that one slide that there's a higher economic benefit to keeping forests for tourism, et cetera, than to tear down these forests and sell them and create more carbon and just create this horrible cycle of, unhealthy, situations for our communities. So we can always go out and protest or write letters. I'm going to be a little bit cynical about that because I don't see legislators ever responding, and usually calling people like me names just want to protect land. So I'm trying to look for a really good economic analysis that could show, like in one chart or graph, much of what you've described in your slides, and being able to use that to show the value of keeping the forest and actually paying landowners to keep their land as it is, versus what's going on. I mean, it just seems really crazy, but I think a lot of people just don't get it. It's just like, I've learned so much during this session. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. But I also think about, now that I know, I would love to like send a chart or whatever that combines the economic facts that you pulled together today and send it to legislators, but also send it to reporters I know and just say, isn't this crazy? Maybe you should dig into this.
Mhm.
And there's a great report on ecosystem survey. Yeah, so thank you. I think this is amazing. I'm so glad I decided to attend.
Yeah, this is great information.
I just linked this report in the chat, but this is a ecosystem
Oh,
services, and there's a whole South, you can, go to any state, but this is the one for South Carolina that has some of those numbers. I'm trying to remember the name of the group we worked with, but we worked with another organization who helped come up with these numbers.
Excellent. Ask and you shall receive.
Will all these, that's right. Will these links be available post chat?
I can
post meeting.
Yes, so we can put them in our next newsletter.
Oh my God, that'd be amazing, Christine.
And Christine, I can pop them in a email while I have them open here and send them to you just for
great.
easy access.
Yeah, and then we can just put them in our next newsletter.
Great.
And there was one other question I want to make sure everybody knows. Sean had asked if there were any volunteer opportunities, and Emily let her know that they do have an ambassador program, and just to email Emily about that. And Laura reminded me the name of the South Carolina bucket that I was talking about is the South Carolina Conservation Bank. So thank you, Laura.
And that's actually the organization that my coworker is working with in Britain's Neck, and I think some other communities too, the South Carolina Conservation Bank. And they've been really amazing and open to this idea of having like a nonprofit or a community actually own the land and be able to conserve it, but also interact with the land in a way that, I think people want to. So yes, kudos to them.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And Terry Lynn has she's pointed us towards a book called Flight Behavior. There was a family that was going to clear cut their forest because they needed to for economic reasons, but they didn't because the monarchs were there, and it gave an ecotourism way to make money. So yeah, several people are saying they love that book. Well, that's great. So we have another book to read, Flight Behavior. All right, well, Emily, we're coming up on the hour here. Thank you so much. We've all learned a lot. We recorded tonight's meeting, so we will put that on our website. And like I said, we will get all of those links in our next newsletter. Thank you so much for coming and sharing this information with us and educating us on what's happening out there in our forest, and a little bit about what we need to do about it and what we can do about it. So, yeah, it's we can always fight the good fight. And we'll definitely help.
That's right.
Yeah, so let's go on the Dogwood Alliance website and email Emily if you want to volunteer, and all the other ways you can volunteer this month locally. Look into the Low Country Land Trust website for Earth Day, because there's a lot of events, and of course next month with Mobility Month. All right, Thank you everyone for coming tonight. We really appreciate seeing you all and hope you have a good rest of your evening, and we will see you next month. Once again. So, all right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.